I'm Madeline, 19 years old, and just started my freshman year at college. My dad was my best friend growing up. He always told me education was the key to my future. When I was 14, he passed away unexpectedly, but made sure my future was secure by setting up a college fund just for me. 2 years later, my mom remarried a man with a teenage daughter. Now they want me to share my college fund with my stepsister. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for what's rightfully yours. My childhood was filled with love and laughter. Dad was always my biggest supporter. He worked as an engineer at a local firm, while Mom stayed home to take care of me until I started middle school. Every weekend, Dad and I had our special ritual. Saturday mornings were for pancakes shaped like animals, and Sunday afternoons were for hiking in the nearby state park. He would tell me stories about his college days, emphasizing how education opened doors for him. Dad loved taking photos of our family adventures. We had albums full of camping trips, beach vacations, and holiday celebrations. He was the kind of father who never missed a school play or science fair. When I brought home good grades, he would beam with pride and say, "That's my brilliant girl." Those words always made me feel like I could accomplish anything. My mother was loving too, but in a more practical way. She made sure I had clean clothes, healthy meals, and completed my homework. While Dad dreamed with me, Mom kept our feet on the ground. They complemented each other perfectly, creating a stable, nurturing environment for me to grow up in. Everything changed when I was 14. Dad started experiencing severe headaches. At first, he brushed them off as stress from work, but when they persisted for weeks, Mom insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis was devastating. Brain cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 4. Those final months were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and tears hidden behind bathroom doors. I tried to be strong, spending every moment I could with him. We played card games in his hospital room and watched our favorite movies. Even as his body failed him, his mind remained sharp focused on making sure Mom and I would be okay after he was gone. The day of his funeral was surreal. So many people came to pay their respects. Colleagues, neighbors, friends. They all had stories about how my father had touched their lives. I stood next to my mother accepting condolences in a fog of disbelief. How could someone so full of life just be gone? After Dad died, Mom withdrew into herself. She would go through the motions of daily life, but the light had gone out of her eyes. I found myself taking on more responsibilities around the house. At 14, I was doing laundry, cooking simple meals, and even managing some bills. I grew up quickly learning to be self-sufficient out of necessity rather than choice. About a month after the funeral, Mom and I met with Dad's attorney. That's when I learned about the college fund. Dad had been putting money into it since I was born. It wasn't just savings, but a formal trust fund with specific terms. The money could only be used for my education expenses. If I chose not to go to college, I would receive the money when I turned 25, with the hope that I would use it wisely to build my future. The attorney handed me a letter Dad had written to accompany the trust documents. His handwriting, once strong and confident, was shaky but determined. He wrote about his dreams for me, his belief in my potential, and his regret that he wouldn't be there to see me graduate. He wanted this money to ensure that I could pursue any educational path I chose without financial burden. It was his final gift to me, his way of still taking care of his little girl. I kept that letter in my nightstand drawer, reading it whenever I missed him most. On particularly hard nights, I would hold the paper to my chest, imagining it was him hugging me. I made a silent promise to him and to myself that I would honor his wishes. I would use the fund as he intended and make him proud. For almost 2 years, Mom and I existed in a delicate balance of grief and recovery. Our relationship was strained but surviving. She started working full-time as an administrative assistant, coming home tired but with a sense of purpose. I focused on school, throwing myself into my studies as a way to honor Dad's memory. We weren't exactly happy, but we were managing. Then Mom met Richard. He came to fix our leaking roof. He owned a small construction company and did some of the work himself. He was charming and attentive to Mom in a way that made her smile again. I was 16 at the time, and while I was glad to see Mom happy, Something about Richard made me uneasy. He was too smooth, too perfect, but I kept those feelings to myself, not wanting to ruin Mom's newfound happiness. 3 months after they started dating, Richard brought his 17-year-old daughter Jasmine to dinner. She was pretty confident and clearly used to being the center of attention. She talked about her cheerleading squad and her popular friends at her private high school. When Mom asked about her college plans, Jasmine flipped her hair and said, "Daddy says I don't need to worry about that yet. I'm focusing on enjoying my high school experience." Richard beamed at his daughter with obvious pride. "Jasmine is special. She has many talents that don't necessarily require traditional education. Besides, there's plenty of time to figure all that out." I remember looking at Mom expecting her to comment on the importance of planning for the future, but she just nodded along with Richard. It was the first sign of many that she was changing, molding herself to fit into Richard's world, rather than maintaining our family values. The engagement came just 6 months after they met. The wedding followed 2 months later. It was a small ceremony at a local event space. Nothing like the intimate gathering I would have expected Mom to want. Jasmine was a bridesmaid wearing a dress that cost more than all of Mom's wedding outfit. I was also a bridesmaid, feeling like an outsider at my own mother's wedding. When they returned from their weekend honeymoon, Richard and Jasmine moved into our house. Suddenly, my quiet home was filled with new voices, new routines, and new expectations. Mom kept saying how wonderful it was to be a real family again. I tried to adapt to find my place in this new dynamic, but it felt like trying to fit into clothes that were 2 sizes too small. Everything was uncomfortable, and I couldn't quite breathe. In the beginning, Jasmine and I maintained a surface-level politeness. We shared a bathroom and occasionally watched TV together, but there was no real connection. She called me sis, in a way that felt more like mockery than affection. When Mom and Richard were around, she played the part of the friendly stepsister. But when we were alone, she mostly ignored me or made subtly cutting remarks. Our differences became more apparent as we spent time under the same roof. I was focused on maintaining my GPA and participating in academic clubs that would strengthen my college applications. Jasmine was all about social status. She spent hours getting ready for parties, took countless selfies for her social media accounts, and treated school as an inconvenience between social events. What bothered me most was her sense of entitlement. She expected Mom to do her laundry and cook special meals for her. When Mom complied, it hurt to see her catering to Jasmine while I had been taking care of myself for years. Jasmine never expressed gratitude, just accepted these services as her due. Richard showed his true colors gradually. At first, he was all smiles and generosity. He bought Mom new clothes and jewelry. He took us all out to expensive restaurants. But along with the gifts came control. He insisted on managing the family finances, including Mom's paycheck. "You've had to worry about money for too long," he told her. "Let me take care of everything now." The subtle digs at me started around the 3rd month after the wedding. Comments like, "You're so serious, Madeline. You should lighten up like Jasmine." Or, "You know not everything has to be about academics. There's more to life than books." On their own, these remarks seemed harmless, but they accumulated like small cuts, leaving me feeling constantly diminished. Mom changed in ways that broke my heart. She began to dress differently, speak differently, even laugh differently. The independent woman who had pulled herself out of grief and built a new life was fading away, replaced by someone whose primary goal was keeping her new husband happy. When I tried to talk to her about it, she dismissed my concerns. "Richard has been wonderful for us, Madeline. We're financially secure now. We have a family again. Why can't you just be grateful and try harder to fit in?" Those words stung because they implied I was the problem, that my inability to fit in was some personal failing rather than a response to being gradually edged out of my own home. Meanwhile, Jasmine's academic struggles were becoming impossible to ignore. Midway through her senior year, she was failing 3 classes. Richard hired expensive tutors, but Jasmine rarely showed up for the sessions. When her poor grades came in, Richard always had an excuse. "The teacher doesn't understand her learning style," or "she's just not being challenged in the right way." What bothered me most was how Jasmine seemed totally unconcerned about her future. While I was researching colleges, writing application essays, and studying for the SAT, she was shopping for prom dresses and planning spring break trips. Her spending habits were outrageous. Every weekend brought new clothes, shoes, or electronics, all funded by Richard's seemingly bottomless credit cards. I continued focusing on my education, working part-time at a local bookstore to save extra money for college expenses. Even though Dad's fund would cover tuition, I wanted to be prepared for other costs. I maintained a 4.0 GPA and took advanced placement classes that would give me college credits. Every achievement felt like a connection to Dad, a way of showing him that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. The tension in our household grew as my senior year progressed. The dynamic had solidified. Richard and Jasmine were the privileged ones. Mom was their admirer and supporter. And I was the outsider, the reminder of a past life Mom seemed eager to forget. Small incidents highlighted this division. When I needed a ride to a weekend study session, no one was available, but Richard would drive Jasmine and her friends to the mall without hesitation. When I cooked dinner, as I often did before they moved in, my efforts were barely acknowledged, but when Jasmine made a simple pasta dish, Richard praised her as if she'd created a gourmet meal. I tried to maintain peace by staying out of their way. I spent more time at the bookstore, at the library, or at my friend Amber's house. When I was home, I kept to my room, creating a sanctuary that remained unchanged amidst all the alterations happening in the rest of the house. Mom occasionally asked why I wasn't spending more time with the family, but she never made a real effort to bridge the growing gap between us. By the time college application season arrived, I felt like a guest in what had once been my home. But I clung to Dad's letter and the promise of the future he had secured for me. No matter how uncomfortable things were now, I knew I had an escape route. College would be my fresh start, away from the toxic atmosphere that had invaded what should have been my safe haven. Senior year was a whirlwind of applications, essays, and anticipation. I applied to 7 schools, including my dad's alma mater, and a few state universities with strong programs in my intended major, psychology. Every application felt like a step closer to freedom, to a life where I could honor Dad's memory without constant reminders of how much my home life had changed. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. 6 out of 7 schools said yes, with 3 offering partial scholarships. I was particularly thrilled about being accepted to Dad's alma mater, Northwestern University. I could almost hear his voice saying, "That's my brilliant girl." The partial scholarship they offered would cover about 30% of the tuition, with the trust fund easily handling the rest. When my acceptance package arrived, I was home alone. I sat on my bed, running my fingers over the embossed university logo, tears of joy and sadness mingling. Joy for this achievement, sadness that Dad wasn't there to celebrate with me. I called Amber, and we squealed together over the phone. Then I texted Mom with the news, hoping for at least some acknowledgement of this milestone. She responded hours later with a brief, "That's nice, we'll talk about it at dinner." That lukewarm reaction was a preview of what was to come. Meanwhile, Jasmine's college process was going quite differently. Despite her poor grades and minimal effort, Richard had paid for applications to several prestigious schools, believing his daughter deserved nothing but the best. The rejection letters arrived one after another. Jasmine's reaction cycled between tantrums and tears, with both Richard and Mom consoling her as if she'd experienced a genuine tragedy, rather than the natural consequence of her choices. The night we discussed my college acceptance at dinner became the stage for our first major confrontation about the trust fund. I had brought my acceptance package to the table, hoping to share my excitement. "Northwestern is a very expensive school," Richard commented after a cursory glance at the materials. "Even with that small scholarship, have you considered somewhere more affordable? Dad's trust will cover the remaining tuition and housing," I explained. "He specifically set it up for my education." Richard exchanged a look with Mom that sent a chill down my spine. "About that trust fund," he said, setting down his fork. "Your mother and I have been thinking, since Jasmine will also need money for college next year, it would be fair for you to share that fund with her. You know, as sisters." The casual way he suggested this, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world, left me momentarily speechless. I looked at Mom, expecting her to correct him, to remind him that the fund was specifically designated for me by my father. Instead, she nodded in agreement. "We're a family now, Madeline. Families share and support each other. Your father would have wanted to help Jasmine too if he had known her." The presumption that she knew what Dad would have wanted infuriated me. No, he wouldn't, I said firmly. He set up this trust specifically for me. It's legally binding. The money can only be used for my educational expenses. I went to my room and returned with the trust documents and Dad's letter. I placed them on the table, pointing out the specific language that restricted the use of the funds. See, it's not just savings in a bank account that can be redistributed. It's a legal trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Richard's face darkened as he skimmed the documents. This seems unnecessarily rigid. Surely there's a way to amend the terms. There isn't, I stated. And even if there were, I wouldn't agree to it. This was Dad's final gift to me. It's not just about the money. It's about respecting his wishes and his memory. The argument that followed was painful and revealing. Richard accused me of being selfish and unwilling to embrace my new family. Mom suggested I was clinging to the past and refusing to move forward. Jasmine sat silently, a small smirk playing at her lips as she watched the drama unfold. "Do you know how much your father's illness cost us?" Mom suddenly burst out. "How much debt we had after he died? I struggled for years while you got this special fund set aside. Don't I deserve some consideration now?" Her words felt like a slap. Dad's medical bills had been mostly covered by insurance, and he had left additional life insurance apart from my trust fund. We had never been in significant debt after his death. Mom's revisionist history was clearly influenced by Richard's narrative, and it hurt to see how easily she had adopted it. The argument ended in an uneasy truce when Richard realized the legal obstacles were real. "We'll table this discussion for now," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't the end of the matter. "But Madeline, I hope you'll reflect on what it means to be part of a family. Sometimes we need to make sacrifices for those we love." As I lay in bed that night clutching Dad's letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger battle. The trust fund was secure legally, but the emotional warfare had just begun, and I wasn't sure how long I could withstand it in the very place I was supposed to call home. The weeks following that first confrontation were filled with increasingly uncomfortable tactics designed to pressure me into reconsidering my position. Richard never missed an opportunity to mention family loyalty and sharing. Comments like, "In this family we support each other," or "Real siblings don't keep score," became common at the dinner table, always delivered with a pointed look in my direction. The passive-aggressive comments extended to my college choice as well. Richard would casually remark, "Northwestern is such an expensive school. All that money for what the state university offers the same degree for half the cost." He conveniently ignored the fact that the trust would cover my expenses regardless of which school I chose, so cost shouldn't be a factor in my decision. Jasmine adopted a victim narrative, sighing dramatically whenever college was mentioned. "I guess some people just get everything handed to them," she would say within my hearing, "while others have to struggle." This from a girl who had never worked a day in her life and had her every whim catered to by her father. The most painful part was watching my mother become complicit in these manipulation attempts. One afternoon, she came to my room and sat on my bed, her expression serious. "I need to talk to you about the college fund situation," she began. "There's no situation, Mom," I replied. "The trust is legally designated for my education. It's not up for negotiation." She sighed, looking tired and older than her years. "Madeline, you need to understand that family dynamics change. When your father set up that trust, it was just the three of us. Now we're part of a larger family with different needs to consider." "Dad set up the trust to secure my future," I reminded her. "That hasn't changed." "But wouldn't your father want you to be generous to help your sister if you could?" "She's not my sister," I said more sharply than I intended. "And Dad was very clear about his wishes. I have the letter to prove it." Mom's expression hardened. "You're using your father's memory to be selfish. He would be disappointed in how unwilling you are to compromise." Those words cut deeper than anything Richard or Jasmine could say. Mom knew exactly how much Dad's approval had meant to me. Using that against me felt like the ultimate betrayal. "You don't get to tell me what would disappoint him," I said, fighting back tears. "You're the one who's changed, not me." She left my room without another word, but the damage was done. I felt isolated and gaslit, questioning whether I was indeed being unreasonable. That evening, I called Mr. Patterson Dad's best friend, and the person who knew him best besides Mom. "Your father was adamant about that trust." Mr. Patterson assured me after I explained the situation. He wanted to make sure your education was secured no matter what. He'd be proud of you for standing your ground. I also consulted the trust attorney, who confirmed that legally there was no way for them to access the fund without my consent. The terms are ironclad, he explained. Your father was very specific. The money is for your education period. My friend Amber was more blunt in her assessment. They're trying to steal from you, Maddie. Don't let them guilt you into giving away what your dad meant for you. Armed with this validation, I felt stronger in my resolve, but the home situation continued to deteriorate. One evening, I overheard a conversation between Richard and Mom that explained their sudden interest in my trust fund. I had come home early from work and was about to enter the kitchen when I heard Richard's agitated voice. The business is struggling, Maria. The bank is threatening to call in the loan. If we don't come up with $60,000 by the end of the month, we could lose everything. But you said the new contracts would cover the payments, Mom replied, her voice tight with anxiety. They fell through. Look, we need to focus on getting access to that college fund. It's just sitting there, and Madeline doesn't even need all of it with her scholarship. It's not fair that she has this cushion while the rest of us struggle. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about Jasmine's education at all. Richard needed money to bail out his failing business, and my trust fund was the most accessible source. The timing of their marriage, the sudden interest in my financial affairs, it all made a terrible kind of sense. I retreated silently to my room, my mind racing. The next day I confronted my mother when Richard was at work. I told her what I had overheard, and asked her directly if Richard had financial problems when they married. Her defensive reaction confirmed my suspicions. You were eavesdropping on a private conversation. How dare you? And so what if Richard has some temporary business challenges? That's what families do. They help each other through difficult times. So you admit this isn't about Jasmine's college fund? I pressed. It's about bailing out Richard's business. It's about being a family, she snapped. Something you clearly don't understand. You have two choices, Madeline. Either you show some loyalty and help this family by sharing that fund, or you prove that you care more about money than the people who love you. As she stormed off, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My own mother was willing to disregard my father's explicit wishes and sacrifice my future to save her new husband's business. And she was using emotional blackmail to try to make me complicit in this betrayal. That night I tossed and turned torn between my duty to honor Dad's memory and my fear of losing my remaining parent. But deep down I knew I couldn't give in. Not just because the money was legally mine, but because surrendering to their manipulation would be the first step down a path of perpetual exploitation. Once they knew I could be pressured into giving up what was rightfully mine, where would it end? The final confrontation happened on a Sunday evening. Richard had announced a special family dinner, insisting that I come home early from my weekend shift at the bookstore. I arrived to find the dining room table set with the good china, a rare occurrence, since Richard and Jasmine had moved in. Mom was unusually quiet as she served the meal, avoiding eye contact with me. Jasmine kept shooting me smug looks that set off warning bells in my head. Richard maintained a facade of joviality, discussing trivial matters as we ate. It wasn't until dessert was served that he revealed the true purpose of the gathering. Madeline, he said, setting aside his dessert plate, we've given you time to think about our discussion regarding the trust fund. Today, we need to reach a resolution. From his briefcase beside the table, he pulled out a folder containing several official-looking documents. I've had my attorney draw up these papers. They would amend the trust to include Jasmine as a beneficiary with a 50-50 split of all funds. The audacity was breathtaking. He slid the papers across the table toward me, along with a pen. We're your family now, Madeline. This is what families do for each other. I looked at the documents without touching them, then looked at my mother. Her expression was tense, expectant. She wanted me to sign away half of what my father had dedicated to my future. Taking a deep breath, I spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. No, I will not sign these papers. The trust fund is exactly what Dad intended it to be, support for my education. It's not a family emergency fund or a business bailout option. Richard's friendly mask slipped instantly. You ungrateful child. After all we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Richard? I asked. Since you moved in, I've been treated like an outsider in my own home. You've tried to erase Dad's memory and replace it with your vision of a perfect family that doesn't include who I really am. How dare you speak to him like that? Mom interjected, her face flushed with anger. I turned to her, feeling a deep sadness beneath my determination. Mom, can't you see what's happening? He doesn't care about Jasmine's education. He needs money for his business. I overheard you talking about the bank calling in his loan. Mom looked startled, then defensive. That's private family business that doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you're trying to use my college fund to solve it, I replied. Dad protected this money for a reason. He wanted to make sure my future wouldn't be compromised no matter what happened. Your father would be ashamed of how selfish you've become, Mom said, her voice shaking with emotion. He raised you to care about family, not to be so cold and calculating. Her words hurt, but I stood firm. Dad would be ashamed that you're trying to dishonor his final wishes, that you're willing to sacrifice my future for a man who sees me as nothing more than a financial resource. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. Enough, I will not be spoken to this way in my own home. This was my home long before it was yours, I replied quietly. Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. Maria, I've tried to be patient. I've tried to include your daughter in our family, but she's made it clear where her loyalties lie, and it's not with us. He turned to me, his voice cold. You have a choice, Madeline. Either you sign these papers and become a true member of this family, or you can take your precious trust fund and leave. A heavy silence fell over the table. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to object, to stand up for me. But she sat silently, her eyes downcast, tacitly supporting her husband's ultimatum. In that moment, something crystallized within me. This wasn't love. Love doesn't come with conditions. Love doesn't demand that you sacrifice your future for approval. Love doesn't force impossible choices. I'll leave, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I won't sign away what Dad intended for me, and I won't stay where I'm only valued for what I can provide. You don't mean that, Mom said, finally looking up. You're just being dramatic. I'm being honest, I corrected her. Something that's been in short supply in this house lately. I'll pack my things tonight. Richard looked momentarily taken aback, as if he hadn't expected me to choose independence over capitulation. Fine. If that's your decision, you can be out by tomorrow. And don't expect any support from us. I stood up from the table, looking at my mother one last time. Is this really what you want, Mom, to choose him over your own daughter, over Dad's memory? Her silence was all the answer I needed. I walked to my room with my head held high, but once the door closed behind me, the tears came. Not just for the home I was losing, but for the mother I had already lost piece by piece to a man who had seen us both as means to an end. With shaking hands, I began to pack my essentials, unsure of where I would go, but certain that anywhere would be better than staying in a house where love came with conditions I could never accept. The first few weeks after being kicked out were a blur of practical challenges and emotional turmoil. My friend Amber and her parents took me in immediately, setting up a temporary bed in their guest room. Stay as long as you need, Amber's mom assured me, her kind eyes filled with concern. No one should have to face this alone. That first night at Amber's house, after everyone had gone to bed, I finally allowed myself to break down completely. Curled up on the unfamiliar bed, I sobbed into the pillow, trying to muffle the sound. I cried for the home I had lost, for the mother who had chosen a manipulative man over her own child, and for the father who had tried so hard to protect me, but couldn't have foreseen this betrayal. In the days that followed, I had to quickly adapt to my new reality. I withdrew the first portion of my trust fund with the attorney's help, using it to pay for my first semester at Northwestern and to set up a small apartment near campus. The trust was structured to release funds each semester directly to the university, with a modest living stipend for housing and books. Dad had thought of everything, creating a system that couldn't be easily manipulated or drained all at once. My mother texted me sporadically in those first weeks. Her messages vacillated between guilt-inducing questions, "How could you abandon your family like this?" and angry accusations, "You've broken my heart with your selfishness." I responded minimally, protecting my raw emotions from further manipulation. Richard made his own attempts at reconciliation, always with strings attached. Your mother misses you. Just come talk about the trust fund situation again. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone. I deleted his messages without responding. What surprised me was Jasmine's reaction. She sent a single text that read, "I never thought you'd actually leave. This wasn't my idea." It was the closest thing to honesty I'd received from her, and though I didn't respond, it made me wonder if she too was somewhat a victim of her father's manipulations. The practical challenges of independence were significant. Even with the trust covering my major expenses, I needed to work part-time to cover daily living costs. I found a job at a campus bookstore working 20 hours a week while carrying a full course load. Balancing work and academics was exhausting, especially against the backdrop of emotional trauma I was still processing. There were nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming, nights when I questioned my decision, wondering if I should have just given in to keep the peace and maintain a relationship with my mother. In those dark moments, I would read Dad's letter again, drawing strength from his words and the love that had prompted him to protect my future. Unexpected support came from Mr. Patterson, Dad's friend, who checked on me regularly and occasionally sent care packages with home-cooked meals frozen for easy reheating. Your father would be so proud of your courage, he told me during one visit. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially when it means standing alone. My high school English teacher, Ms. Reynolds, also became a valuable mentor. Now that I was no longer her student, our relationship evolved into a friendship. She had lost her own mother at a young age and understood the particular grief of parental betrayal. Some people aren't capable of being who we need them to be, she explained one afternoon over coffee. It's not your job to shrink yourself to accommodate their limitations. New friendships formed in my classes and dormitory. People who knew me as I was, now not as the girl from the broken home with the step-family drama. These fresh relationships were uncomplicated by history, allowing me to develop parts of myself that had been suppressed in the toxic environment of Richard's house. The academic challenges were significant too. Trying to focus on studies while processing such personal turmoil wasn't easy. There were days when I stared at textbooks reading the same paragraph over and over without comprehension. My first paper came back with a lower grade than I was accustomed to, the professor noting that my arguments lacked focus and development. That wake-up call helped me compartmentalize. I couldn't let Richard and my mother derail my future any more than they already had. I sought help from the university's counseling services, learning techniques to manage anxiety and focus on the present rather than ruminating on past betrayals or worrying about future confrontations. There were moments of temptation when I considered giving in. After a particularly exhausting week of work and studies, I received a text from Mom saying she missed me and wanted to talk. No mention of the trust fund or Richard's demands, just an expression of maternal longing. My finger hovered over the reply button, a part of me desperate to believe we could repair our relationship without me sacrificing my boundaries. But then I remembered how she had sat silently while Richard gave me an ultimatum, how she had used Dad's memory as a weapon against me, how quickly she had replaced our family unit with a new one that required erasing the past. I put the phone away without responding, choosing to protect myself from another cycle of manipulation and disappointment. Throughout this challenging period, Dad's memory became both a comfort and a source of strength. On particularly difficult days, I would visit the university's garden, finding a quiet bench where I could talk to him in my mind. I would tell him about my classes, my new friends, and my struggles. Somehow these one-sided conversations helped me feel connected to his guidance and love, even in his absence. As the semester progressed, I gradually developed a new sense of self-reliance. Each bill paid on time, each assignment completed despite emotional distractions. Each meal prepared in my tiny kitchen became a small victory, proof that I could not just survive but thrive on my own. The pain didn't disappear, but it began to transform into a different kind of strength, the kind that comes from walking through fire and emerging on the other side, changed but undefeated. A year passed. The seasons changed and I changed with them. My small apartment near campus had become a true home, decorated with photos of new friends and mementos of new experiences. My academic performance had recovered and even exceeded my previous standards, earning me a place on the dean's list 2 semesters in a row. The part-time job at the campus bookstore had evolved into a position with more responsibility and slightly better pay. Independence had taught me countless practical skills. I could now cook more than just basic meals, handle minor household repairs, and navigate the complexities of health insurance and taxes. These weren't lessons I had expected to learn so young, but they had become badges of pride, tangible evidence of my resilience. Through mutual friends from high school, I occasionally heard news about Jasmine. After her rejection from the prestigious universities Richard had set his heart on, she had enrolled in the local community college. Apparently, Richard's promises about funding her education had proven as empty as most of his other commitments. She was working part-time at a clothing store in the mall, finally experiencing some of the real-world responsibilities she had been sheltered from for so long. I felt no satisfaction in hearing about her struggles. If anything, I felt a twinge of empathy. We had both been pawns in Richard's schemes, albeit in different ways. I wondered if the experience of having to work for what she wanted was helping her develop the maturity she had lacked during our time living together. The relative peace of my new life was interrupted by an unexpected call from Mr. Patterson on a rainy Tuesday evening. "Your mother's in the hospital, Madeline," he said, his voice grave. "She collapsed at work. They think it might be her heart." The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my mother, still the woman who had kissed my scraped knees and read me bedtime stories. "Is it serious?" I managed to ask. "Serious enough that you should come," he replied. "I can pick you up if you need a ride." An hour later, I was walking through the antiseptic corridors of the same hospital where my father had spent his final days. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, adding another layer of emotional complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Mom looked small in the hospital bed, attached to monitors that beeped quietly in the background. Richard was noticeably absent. When I asked a nurse about him, she mentioned that he had been there earlier, but left to take care of some business matters. Even with his wife in the hospital, Richard's priorities were clear. Mom's eyes widened when she saw me, a mix of surprise and what looked like shame crossing her face. "Madeline," she whispered, "you came." "Of course I came," I replied, taking the seat beside her bed. "You're my mother." There was an awkward silence as we both recognized the weight of those words against the backdrop of the past year's estrangement. Finally, she spoke again. "The doctors say it was a minor heart attack, a warning sign. I need to reduce stress and change my diet." I nodded, noting how much older she looked than when I had last seen her. There were new lines around her eyes and mouth, and her hair had more gray in it. "Are they keeping you overnight?" I asked. "For observation," she confirmed. "Richard had to go check on something at work. He said he'll be back later." The mention of his name hung between us, the elephant in the room we were both avoiding. I chose not to comment, focusing instead on her immediate needs. "Can I get you anything? Water? Another blanket?" She shook her head, then hesitated. "Just maybe stay a while if you have time." I did stay for several hours. We talked cautiously, avoiding the most painful topics and sticking to safe subjects like my classes and her job. When I finally left, promising to return the next day, I felt a confusing mix of emotions: relief at seeing her anger still simmering beneath the surface, and a profound sadness for what our relationship had become. True to his pattern, Richard was absent during most of my hospital visits. On the third day, however, I arrived to find him alone in Mom's room while she was having some tests done. The tension was immediate and palpable. "Madeline," he acknowledged stiffly, "your mother will be glad you came again." "How is she today?" I asked, ignoring his attempt at small talk. "Better. The doctors say she can probably go home tomorrow." He paused, then added with obvious reluctance, "It's good that you've been visiting. It means a lot to her." I nodded, moving to take my usual seat by the window, hoping to wait in silence until Mom returned. Richard, however, seemed determined to have a conversation. "Business has been difficult lately," he offered, as if continuing a discussion we'd been having. "The economy, you know. It's hitting small companies like mine especially hard." I remained silent, unwilling to engage with what felt like the beginning of another manipulation attempt. My lack of response seemed to irritate him. You know, he continued, his tone hardening. A lot of your mother's stress comes from worrying about you, from the rift in the family that you created. At that, I couldn't stay silent. I created, I repeated incredulously. You gave me an ultimatum. You told me to either sign over half of Dad's trust fund or leave. I made the only choice I could while still respecting myself. You always were stubborn, he muttered, just like your father, according to Maria. The mention of my father from his lips felt like a desecration. Don't talk about my dad, I said quietly but firmly. You never knew him. You have no right to reference him or guess what he would have wanted. Richard's facade finally cracked. What I wanted was a united family. What I got was a stepdaughter who thought she was better than everyone else who refused to help when we needed it most. What you wanted was access to money that wasn't yours, I corrected him. You never saw me as family. I was just an obstacle to the trust fund. He didn't deny it, which was perhaps the most honest he had ever been with me. The money would have helped all of us, including you in the long run, but you were too short-sighted to see that. The money is helping me exactly as Dad intended, I replied calmly, and I'm grateful every day that he had the foresight to legally protect it from people like you. Our conversation was interrupted by Mom's return to the room. She looked between us with apprehension, clearly sensing the tension. Is everything okay? She asked. Fine, Richard said tersely, standing up. I need to make some calls. I'll be back later. He left without another word, not even a goodbye kiss for his wife. Mom watched him go, then turned to me with tired eyes. You two were arguing. He brought up the past, I said simply. I responded truthfully. She sighed, settling back against her pillows. He's under a lot of pressure. The business is failing. We might lose the house. Despite everything, I felt a stab of concern for her. What will you do? I don't know, she admitted. Richard says he has some plans, some potential investors, but nothing concrete yet. I nodded, thinking about how different her life might have been if she hadn't hitched her wagon to Richard's unstable star. If she had maintained her independence and the modest but secure life we had built after Dad died. Mom, I said tentatively, if things get really bad, you know you can call me, right? I can't solve financial problems, but I wouldn't want you to be unsafe or homeless. Her eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in a long time. After everything, you'd still help me. You're my mother, I said again, the same words I had spoken on my first visit. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has. We sat in silence for a while, a fragile understanding beginning to form between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was perhaps the first step toward something new, something that acknowledged both the hurt of the past and the possibility of a different kind of relationship in the future. In the weeks that followed, Mom and I began a careful rebuilding process. We met occasionally for coffee, keeping our conversations light at first, then gradually addressing some of the harder topics. Richard was rarely mentioned, though. I gathered from her comments that their relationship was strained by financial stress, and perhaps by his recognition that he couldn't control me through her anymore. When I visited my father's grave on the anniversary of his death, I was surprised to find fresh flowers already placed there. Mom had visited earlier that day separately, but with the same purpose. It felt symbolic somehow, the two of us honoring him independently, but with shared love. Standing before his headstone, I felt a new perspective emerging. Dad had protected me not just financially through the trust, but spiritually through the values he had instilled in me. The strength to stand up for myself, the courage to face uncertainty, and the wisdom to recognize that true love never comes with conditions or ultimatums. I'm doing well, Dad, I whispered to the quiet cemetery. Your gift has given me more than just an education. It gave me the freedom to become who I meant to be, not who others wanted me to be. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. The pain hadn't disappeared, and some wounds might never fully heal. But I had survived the worst of the storm. I had maintained my integrity in the face of manipulation. I had honored my father's memory while forging my own path forward. The trust fund that had been the source of so much conflict had indeed secured my education as my father intended. But the most valuable lessons I had learned weren't taught in any classroom. They were hard-won insights about self-worth boundaries and the true nature of love and family. I had learned that sometimes family is defined not by blood or marriage, but by the people who respect your boundaries and support your growth. I had learned that standing alone for what's right is better than compromising your values for conditional acceptance. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that love with conditions isn't love at all, but a transaction that will always cost more than it gives. Has your family ever asked you to sacrifice something important to you? Have you had to stand up for yourself against pressure from loved ones? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember, your story matters and might help someone facing similar challenges. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, true love empowers you to become your best self. It doesn't diminish you to serve someone else's agenda.